Why did the US suddenly fall for Central Asia? Why abandon Australia for Central Asia? Believe it or not, just last month, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese flew 14,000 kilometers to the White House, armed with his country's latest mineral exploration report, to pledge allegiance. The US had just waved its hand and committed $2 billion to sign a critical minerals strategic cooperation agreement with Australia, with press releases touting the unbreakable resource ties between allies. Yet, less than 30 days later, President Trump invited the leaders of the 5 Central Asian nations to the White House. The red carpet was rolled out from the car door to the Oval Office, and a C5+1 Summit resulted in cooperation deals worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Ignoring Australia, a steadfast ally with whom the US has claimed a blood thicker than water bond for decades, the US instead embraced the 5 Central Asian nations, long cold-shouldered by the West for half a century, with elbow bumps, photo ops, and a scalding-hot attitude. This bewildering shift from arrogance to deference must have caused instant cognitive failure. What exactly is the US planning? In fact, a brutally simple logic hides behind this. Critical minerals are the salt of technology. Today, without them, even the most formidable technology is useless. Imagine cooking without salt. Even the finest delicacies would be flavorless. The same goes for high-tech industries. The magnetic materials in the chips of the smartphone in your hand rely entirely on rare earths. Without them, the screen won't even light up. The batteries of new energy vehicles require 12 grams of cobalt and 3 grams of rare earths per kilowatt-hour. Without these rocks, the most dazzling electric car is just a pile of scrap metal. Even America's most prized possession, the F-35 fighter jet, requires high-temperature-resistant tungsten alloys for its engine turbine blades, and its navigation system's precision components rely on rare earth permanent magnets. Missing any one of these makes the multi-million-dollar jet an earthbound hunk of iron. How passive was the US previously? 70% of its rare earth was imported from China, and 30% of its tungsten relied on Asian supply. It was like relying entirely on a neighbor to deliver salt for all your cooking. If the neighbor raised the price or cut off supply, your kitchen would shut down. In 2023, rare earth import delays caused 5 U.S. defense contractors to temporarily halt production, resulting in losses exceeding $2 billion. This feeling of being choked has thoroughly rattled the U.S. What's even more revolutionary is that this White House summit directly laid bare America's resource ambition, with astonishing details. When Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev announced at the signing ceremony that nearly $35 billion will be invested and procured in the U.S. aviation and critical minerals sectors over the next 3 years, with the total amount exceeding $100 billion over 10 years, Trump pounded the table in approval. This $100 billion is not an empty promise. 40% is earmarked for procuring aviation equipment from Boeing and mining machinery from General Electric, GE, and the remaining funds will be injected into a US-led Central Asia Mineral Development Fund. Kazakhstan was even more direct, signing a $17.2 billion deal with the US Freeport-McMoRan, including a $1.1 billion tungsten development agreement that explicitly requires the supply of 500 tons of high-purity tungsten concentrate per month to U.S. defense companies starting in 2026. These Central Asian countries, once seen by the West as remote, poor nations, now hold rocks, so valuable they can be spent like cash, even giving them leverage to negotiate with a superpower. While the U.S. appears to be splashing cash to win favor, it is actually using short-term investment to lock in long-term resources. This simultaneously solves the supply problems of rare earths and tungsten and binds Central Asia to its industrial chain, providing a double insurance for its fragile technological supply chain and finally escaping dependence on a single country. Next, we will dissect why the US suddenly fell for Central Asia. How much of this seemingly impressive cooperation hides the underhanded dealings of great power competition, and what bloody lessons from Europe and the US should serve as warnings to us, Australia, the ex-partner, and America's resource pragmatism. First, let's look at how slighted America's ex-partner Australia must feel. Just a month ago, PM Albanese specifically traveled to the White House to sign the Critical Minerals Cooperation Agreement with Trump, with both sides committing $1 billion to build the most stable resource supply chain. Yet, the U.S. immediately offered supranational treatment to Central Asia. Uzbekistan's $35 billion investment and procurement order over 3 years is 4 times larger than the entire $8.5 billion U.S.-Australian cooperation plan. What's more painful is that Trump's promise to Australia didn't even include tariff reductions, while Central Asian mineral imports were given a green channel. This is not a sudden change of heart. For the U.S., Australia simply could not deliver the resource value of $53 billion touted in the U.S.-Australian agreement has yet to pinpoint clear mineral deposit locations. The founder of a U.S. rare earth company directly exposed the truth. Australia cannot meet even 1/3 of U.S. demand, and we will need decades to catch up with China's production capacity. In contrast, Central Asia holds massive reserves. Kazakhstan's tungsten reserves are the second largest globally, and the newly signed $1.1 billion development project alone can satisfy 20% of U.S. defense industry annual demand. Uzbekistan's copper reserves rank among the world's top 10, enough to support the U.S. new energy vehicle industry for 5 years. The U.S. is not falling for someone new. It is simply finding the right major player. Commentary and analysis. The U.S.'s choice is never about sentiment, but about results. The political halo of the U.S.-Australia alliance ultimately could not stand up to Central Asia's tangible resource reserves. Behind this pragmatism lies the brutal logic of the global supply chain. Whoever controls the core resources holds the discourse power. Australia's awkward position reminds us that simply clinging to a superpower as an ally is not enough. Self-reliance is the true source of confidence. America's partner switch also signals that the global contest for critical minerals has shifted from bloc politics to resource centrism. Europe's bloody lesson and America's rush to stockpile minerals. Europe's bloody lesson further explains why the U.S. is rushing to stockpile minerals. In August this year, Germany's largest battery manufacturer announced a 30% reduction in production, halting some production lines. The reason was simple: a rare earth supply cut. It is worth noting that the German new energy vehicle industry accounts for 15% of the EU's total output, and manufacturing an electric car battery requires 6 key minerals, including lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, with Germany importing 90% of its rare earths. Similarly affected was France's Airbus, which saw production of its A350 passenger jet engine blades temporarily suspended due to a lack of tungsten, losing €20 million for every day of downtime. Europe's predicament is precisely a cautionary tale for the U.S. U.S. Geological Survey data shows that in 2024, 70% of U.S. rare earths came from Asia, mostly from China. Specialty rare earths for magnets in F-35 fighter jets are almost entirely imported. Trump stated bluntly at the summit, "We can no longer leave the lifeblood of our supply chain in the hands of others." The new cooperation with Central Asia is heavily weighted. The joint procurement of 37 Boeing aircraft by Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan alone included clauses for priority supply of aviation-grade titanium ore. The $17.2 billion contract with Kazakhstan explicitly requires the direct shipment of processed tungsten to U.S. defense contractors. The U.S. is essentially building its production line right at the resource production site. Commentary and analysis. Europe's resource anxiety is essentially a severe disconnect between industrial development and resource reserves. The reason the U.S. is rushing to tie itself to Central Asia is its desire to avoid repeating Europe's mistakes. The halt at the German battery plant and the reduction at Airbus prove that high-tech industries without resource support are castles in the air. America's strategy, while seemingly aggressive, is actually a proactive move to secure technological competitiveness for the next decade. Whoever controls critical minerals controls the future of new energy and high technology. Why Central Asia now? The Resource for development. Bargain. Some might ask why Central Asian resources, which have long been known to exist, are only now being chosen by the US. The answer lies in a set of revolutionary data. The 5 Central Asian nations hold 28.52% of the world's tungsten reserves and 15.57% of its uranium reserves. Kazakhstan's newly discovered rare earth deposit alone contains over 20 million tons of resources, second only to China and Brazil. However, for decades, these resources were either held by Russia or left undeveloped due to poor transportation. Now, the bait offered by the US is sufficiently tempting, not only financial support but also a commitment to help Central Asia build railways and repair ports, solving the last mile problem for resource exports. More crucially, the Central Asian nations are in urgent need of a backer. Uzbekistan previously relied on cotton and gold exports, leading to high economic volatility, while Kazakhstan is an oil producer. Falling oil prices have severely strained its finances. The US investment is like a timely rain. Uzbekistan's 3-year, $35 billion investment and procurement plan is equivalent to 12% of its 2024 GDP. Kazakhstan's $17.2 billion contract is expected to directly create 50,000 jobs. This resources for development model is difficult for Central Asia to refuse. China, while an important trading partner for Central Asia, focuses mainly on the energy sector and has been preempted by the US in deep cooperation regarding critical minerals. This resource marriage between the US and Central Asia is essentially a microcosm of the global technological competition. Whoever controls critical minerals controls the future discourse power. Europe's lesson, Australia's embarrassment, and Central Asia's opportunity all tell us, in this era of resource is king, there are no permanent allies, only permanent interests.